excited? Are you ready to go? Yeah. Okay. Hello there, it's Miss Fish here, coming to you from the wilderness. So I'm out here hiking with my good boy Banjo. We're going on a short little adventure. I figured it would be easier to get this series started with somewhere that's not quite like climbing on top of a mountain, but we will do that soon. Oh, potty break. Okay, potty break over. Got everything cleaned up. As you see, this is not so remote. We are not so very removed, but we are in the wilderness nonetheless. I am going to be answering questions that people had for me that they posted on our Blackboard discussion boards. These questions are related to the English content area, and I got a range of really good responses, and I probably have more prepared than I'll even be able to cover in this video. I have some lessons that I've compiled that I will discuss in this here video. I finally gave a purpose to this random book that I have. I found it at a thrift shop, and it's like all the paper is handmade. So this is my book that I've compiled all of the lessons in. So I'm just going to try to go through these as best I can. I've never taught and hiked before, so this will be a learning process for me. It is a little muddy here, so I'll be trying to watch my step. Banjo just fell right there. That's why I was laughing. Okay, so I guess without further ado, I shall begin. Oh gosh. Banjo, you can't do that. You can't do that. There you go. Alright, lesson 1. And this is one that a lot of people had questions about. And it's one that I was actually thinking about incorporating into our lesson plans at some point soon. Just because it's something that a lot of people could use some help with. Active and passive voice. So that is, voice refers to the form of a verb that indicates when a grammatical subject performs the action or is the receiver of the action. When a sentence is written in the active voice, the subject performs the action, and in the passive voice, the subject receives the action. In academic writing, it is generally preferred to choose an active verb and pair it with a subject that names the person or thing done or performing the action. Active verbs are usually stronger and usually more emphatic than the forms of verb be or verbs in the passive voice. Active sentences are about what people do or things, while passive voice sentences are about what happens to people or things. The passive voice is the verb be, so that would be, am, is, are, was, were, being, or been, followed by a past participle of the main verb. So an active phrase would be he loves me. The passive version of that would be I am loved. In the active version, we actually get more information. We know that he loves me, whereas in the passive, it's only I am loved. But I guess to get all of the information, it would be I am loved by him. So then another example would be we took our children to the circus. A passive version of that sentence would be the children were taken to the circus. Again, we get some information here. We are the ones who took my kids to the circus. And then lastly, we have an active and passive example of this sentence. A thief stole my money, or my money was stolen. So in all of these examples, the subject or doer, the one doing the action, comes first. And then we have the object of the action, and then the action being taken. This is a handwritten part that kind of breaks it down in another way. So an active sentence, the formula is the doer or the subject, the action or the verb, and then the object of the action at the end. whereas passive would be the object of the action first, followed by the action, and sometimes it includes the doer or the subject, but not always. As far as which is preferred in academic writing, the reason so many people get that on their comments is that active voice is preferred in academic writing. It's acceptable to emphasize the receiver rather than the doer, to keep the focus on the same subject throughout the sentences or paragraphs when we do not know who or what performed the action, when we do not want to mention the doer, or when we want to sound objective or use this or avoid using the subject I. So like this says, active voice is usually preferred, but there are certainly examples when you can use passive voice. It's not like incorrect versus correct English. It's just a matter of making your phrases sound stronger rather than a little bit weaker of a phrase like passive voice does, where it'll usually not give you as much information, or it will be a little less direct with how it's speaking. Okay, another question I got quite a bit of is the difference between a colon and a semicolon, and when you're supposed to use it in your writing, and when you're not supposed to write it. So my biggest tip for using semicolons and colons is don't use them unless you know how to use them. They're not really ever crucial to your writing. You can usually get away without one or with a different type of punctuation. Western Michigan University, this is something I found them talking about online. So they say that the colon and the semicolon are frequently used incorrectly in place of each other. The two punctuation marks serve very different purposes and should not be used interchangeably. So a colon is used to give emphasis, present dialogue, introduce a list or text, and clarify composition titles. So when you emphasize something with a colon, you capitalize the first word after the colon only if it is a proper noun, or if it starts with a complete sentence, or it is the start of a complete sentence. She had one love, Western Michigan University. And then in dialogue, so you'll see these in scripts. Oh, that's pretty. Okay, so in dialogue, you write the speaker's name followed by a colon, his or her name and statement. So a reporter said, what is the Western Edge? Dunn said, it is a strategic plan for promoting student success. Then you can also use a colon to introduce lists, texts, or tabular material. So capitalize the first word after the colon, only if it is a proper noun or the start of a complete sentence. Our future is depending on three things: sustainability, diversity, and enhancing our strength and health. That list is not a complete phrase or thought. It's a sentence fragment, and it relies on the rest of the phrase to have a complete thought, a complete sentence. You can also use colons to clarify the title of books, lectures, other compositions. So use a colon in the title that expresses two parallel ideas. The words on either side of the colon should be able to stand on their own. He wrote, crisis management by apology, corporate response to allegations of wrongdoing. So then a semicolon, you use these for two general uses: to clarify a series and to indicate two closely related sentences. In a series, if one or more elements in a series contain a comma, use a semicolon to separate them. Include a semicolon before the final conjunction. Members of the Western Jazz Quartet has a name, comma, what they play, and then semicolon, name, comma, what they play, semicolon. So there's your first case of when you would use that. And then next, you would use a semicolon to connect two closely related sentences. So for the most part, you should use a semicolon only when you could also use a period. So it could be a complete sentence, no sentence fragments. No. Two closely related sentences, for the most part, you should use semicolon only when you use a period, but you want to demonstrate a relationship between two complete sentences. Good grades are integral to student success. semicolon. A strong support network is also important. A period there would be completely correct. A semicolon here just shows the relationship between the two sentences. So, alright, that's my colon and semicolon lesson. And I seem to have just stumbled upon an interesting place. You know, I've not enjoyed the hike at all, so I'm gonna take a few minutes just to enjoy this area. Ooh, that looks like a honeycomb. Yeah. No. It has pencils in it? Or are those honeycombs? You know, I think they are. Banjo, you're gonna tear this. Be careful. That's important. Pollinator habitat. Okay, yeah. So those are our pollinators. And we've got a habitat here. Okay. Everything looks pretty dead, but that's because we're just coming out of winter. Interesting. What is that? Well, my mind immediately thinks guillotine, but that couldn't possibly be what that is. Oh, it's a door! That's precious. Ah, look! Look at it! Banjo, that's a door. You can't just go under the door. That's adorable. Ha! Adorable. Puns. So a pun is a play on word. Random lesson that nobody asked for, but I gave it to you anyway because I just use a pun. Ha ha ha. Oh my gosh, there's another one. I'm in love. Secret garden? Oh my gosh! Banjo! What did we just find? This is so much more interesting than ending a sentence with prepositions. But we're going to learn about them anyway. So, the answer is a sentence can be correct if it ends in a prepositional phrase or a preposition, but you should avoid it, especially in academic writing, because it's a more informal way of speaking, or it's usually used in speech rather than writing. And we'll get more on the difference between standard English on page versus dialectual English that is spoken. So, as you see, I've just got a list of our prepositions just to remind us what they are. So we've got aboard, about, across, above, against, along, around, amid, among, after, at, except for, during, down, behind, below, beneath, beside, between, before, behind, beyond, by, in, far, off, on, over, of, unto, until, upon, under, underneath, since, up, like, near, past, throughout, through, with, within, without, instead, toward, inside, into, to. Banjo wants to go back over here, so I guess we'll do that. So these are examples of correct sentences that use both ending with a preposition and then not. So a more casual way of saying this sentence would be, which journal was your article published in? Whereas a more formal way of saying the same sentence, both correct, would be, in which journal was your article published? So the in is at the beginning of the sentence rather than the end. In here we have an example that is actually incorrect. So the incorrect phrase would be, he walked down the street at a brisk pace with his waistcoat buttoned against the cold and a jaunty top hat perched atop. Ooh, that was kind of hard to say. a jaunty top hat perched atop. The correct way of saying that would be, he walked down the street at a brisk pace with his waistcoat buttoned against the cold and a jaunty top hat perched atop his stately head. So just a couple more words here will turn it from an incorrect statement to a correct statement. Another formal way of saying something to more casual would be, to whom should I give a high five? That would be a formal way of saying that sentence, and a more casual way of saying it would be, who should I give a high five to? So just try to stick to no sentences ending in prepositions in your formal writing. If you do some here or there, that's not the end of the world. Just make sure that they're correct sentences overall. think we can move on to the next one. What do you think, Banjo? Oh, this is a good one. So this is actually a question that someone asked me in class, and I didn't 100% know the answer, and I felt kind of horrible for not knowing the answer. The issue that I'm finding with becoming an English teacher is that there are a lot of things that I've kind of been good at without really knowing why. I know that some things are correct and some things are incorrect, but I'm not 100% always sure why. Ooh, it's a bird observing area. I suppose you can observe other things from here. Banjo, watch out. Ooh. There's one Banjo level and there's one my level. Come here. Banjo. You watch yours, I'll watch mine. Okay, so this is the difference between lay and lie. These are things that I've just kind of not used these in my writing just because I don't usually want to think about which is correct and which is incorrect. Lay means to set an object down, to lay. To lie is to rest or recline. I think this image here did a really good job depicting that. So as you see, this hen is laying some eggs, or she has laid some eggs, or she lay eggs. And then if the hen were to recline or lie, it would just be lying down with a nice good book. The present of lay would be lay. Past tense would be laid. Present participle would be laying, and past participle would be laid. And then for lie, this is where we get some confusion. So lie is the present tense of recline. Lay is the past tense of recline, whereas it's the present tense of to set something down. Lying is the present participle, so the hen is lying down, and past participle, the hen has lain down in bed. My recommendation, learn about it. If you don't know it, just don't use them. Find other words for it. Just look at this information to help you figure it out. 'Cause Banjo is super ready to keep walking. Ugh. I love that picture though. That's probably helped me more than anything. And this is absolutely beautiful. Look at that mountain. Wow. Oh, nice. Now we get another fun one. All right, I believe we are ready to move on. Let's scout the horizon, Banjo. This is a homophone, which is a word that is spelled differently, sounds the same, and has different meanings. So we're talking about affect and effect. This is another one that I've just kind of gotten able to do it without really thinking about why I'm doing what I am. So it's been helpful to go back and actually look at this and try to figure out how to explain it so that I can become a better teacher. So affect with an A is a verb, or almost always used as a verb. It means to influence or cause someone or cause change to something. So a lot of times, if I'm not 100% sure if I'm going for affect or effect, I'll use the word influence instead. And then affect with an E, it's most usually used as a noun, which means the result of an influence. So you can see how these two words are quite similar, and I think that's why people confuse them so often, because a lot of the time other homophones will have completely different meanings. But this one, the meaning is somewhat similar. So you just need to remember that one is a verb and one is a noun. And you need to remember the difference between the two and where they belong in a sentence. So I thought this picture was a really nice example of affect and effect. This lightning bolt is going to affect this plant by shocking it, and so it is having an impact on this thing. And then the effect or the result that it has is the E. So the affect of this lightning bolt had the effect of a burnt plant. So then I thought this was a kind of similar image. This rain cloud affects the monster by raining on it, but then the effect afterwards is the monster is wet. And then again, we have an example here of someone affecting change to someone by pushing them into water. And then the effect or the result is they are now in the water. Same thing, different scenario, happier for the plant, is that rain affects growth, and the effect is a nice happy plant that is grown up. Might have a bad future, we'll see. So that's your effect and your effect. Ooh, I'm excited for these ones. Okay, these are two separate questions, but they were on a similar topic, so I just decided to put them together. First, I'm going to read this side. Someone asked me, what are good ways to boost your grade when you're writing an essay? I should have written this as my number one, and it kind of is. Be original and unique. And by that, I mean write your own things, first of all. Plagiarism is a big no-no in the academic world, and it's important to learn exactly what is plagiarism, what is not plagiarism, so you can always know that you are being original when you're writing. So my first one is to be original and unique. And there are a lot of ways to be unique in your writing. One, talk about topics that maybe other people have covered before, but you're doing it in a different way. For example, other people have explained how to write essays before, but no one's ever done it in a setting like this. And that's something unique, that's something original that I'm doing, even though it's a topic that other people have covered in the past. Number two, write about something that's interesting to you. And I know in school, a lot of times people are telling you what to write about, and it feels like, ew, bitch. It's stuck to his slobber. Things that you're reading or the things that you're writing about are selected for you. It can be difficult to take it in a direction that's interesting to you, but I challenge you to try. There are a lot of different ways to focus any topic, whether it be a book you didn't really care for. Okay, well, you can talk about the narrative style of it and why you didn't care for it, because something that's interesting to you is why you didn't really like this book. So you can talk about narrative structure, how it's effective to pieces. Banjo, I don't know what you're sniffing, but we need to not do that. So another thing, use correct grammar or edit and proofread your piece. It is very important when you're talking about the actual grade of your piece to speak correctly, write correctly. If you don't, that's an area that you're going to get points taken off. So always be checking your pieces for grammar, and proofreading is a really important thing to do before you submit a piece, because just because you wrote it out once doesn't mean you got everything out perfectly the way it should read to another person. So one thing I like to tell people to do is to read their piece aloud, because there are a lot of times that your fingers will get ahead of your brain, or your brain will get ahead of your fingers, I suppose. And what I mean by that is you'll be typing. You think you put an important word into your piece, but you didn't. So reading it aloud is a great way to realize, oh, I completely missed the subject of this sentence. Always do your spell check and your grammar checks. All of that's really important stuff to make sure that the finished piece that you turn in is nice and polished. All right. Another way to strengthen your writing is to write with a specific audience in mind. So, if you're writing an argumentative essay, are you writing it to people who need to be persuaded? Are you writing it to people who agree with what you're saying? A lot of times also your audience can be people your age, your peers, adolescents, teenagers, young adults, college educated, high school diploma holding. All of these different groups are going to prefer different styles of writing. Do your research. And when you do your research, make sure to cite your information. I don't know how many times I've gotten a random piece of information documented in someone's essay and then no claim as to where that comes from. And it'll be like a statistic or a percentage. And I'm like, that's not common knowledge. Not everyone knows that this percent of whoever thinks this. Unless you give me a citation. Okay, well, where'd you get that information? Because if you got it out of the air, well, that doesn't really belong in an essay. So do your research, make sure you know what you're talking about. This goes for all writing, not just like research writing. For example, if you're doing some creative writing and you're trying to write your setting, or you're trying to write what people are saying and it's a different place than where you're familiar, it's going to be kind of clear if you don't know anything about that place's setting or that region's dialect. So keep that in mind when you're writing creatively as well. Try to stick to what you know, and if you want to expand on what you know and explore different terrains in your writing, feel free to do so. But just make sure you do your research. Make sure you know that the kind of trees you see here are not the kind of trees you see, the coast of Florida or the coast of California. Those are all going to be different settings, so keep that in mind. You can do your research by visiting such places, or you can just simply look online. Oh yes, quotes. Use quotes sparingly and relevantly. That means when you're using information from research or from other sources, try to paraphrase it when you can. So paraphrase it so you don't use too much of other things, and so that your piece of writing is primarily your own. And when you're not sure if it needs to be cited or not, it probably does. If you're questioning if it needs to be cited, it most likely needs to be cited. And you can never have too many citations. And don't use quotes if they're not necessary. If they don't directly connect to what you're addressing in the paragraph, then there's no need to add a quotation there. I know we all have word counts that we struggle to meet sometimes, but throwing in a bunch of random quotes isn't really going to cut it. Outline your thesis. All right. Well, I think of this one as just outlining in general. So outline your thesis as in know exactly what you're writing about, have a point from the get-go, and make sure the rest of your piece connects in some way to your thesis. Now, you can just touch on something at the beginning and then show it through the rest of your writing, or you can use the thesis as kind of like a structure to how you're going to start each of your body paragraphs. I'm sure we're all familiar with the 3-point thesis where I'm going to talk about this, and then this. And that's a good way to get the structure of your piece of writing as well. Even if you decide not to specifically introduce all of your topics like that, or make it really clear that that's how your paper is structured, it'll still be helpful to at least have that as a starting point. And I kind of already went on this one. Have a point and make each of your sentences relevant. I know in longer form writing, a lot of times we think we can just throw whatever in there and no one will really notice, but it all needs to have some sort of connection to it. You have more space to get more thoughts out in essay format rather than like poetry or whatever, but every word still matters, every sentence still matters. One idea per paragraph. Yeah, don't try to just jump around all the time. That's something that I notice in a lot of people's essays is they have an idea and then they kind of touch on another idea that they don't really go into detail in, and then they go back to their first idea, and then in the next paragraph they talk about the idea that they barely mentioned in the previous one. It just makes the organization a little bit difficult to follow. Come here. My last tip is to include leading and transitional phrases. Those just help mapping out your piece of writing. It helps the reader know exactly where you're going from, like what you're talking about, into transitioning into a quote and then transitioning into analysis. it just adds clarity into your piece, makes it easier for them to read, and if a piece is easier for a person to read, then they'll probably get a better grade on it. And then a couple people asked me about using figurative language in their own writing. One person specifically said essay writing, and that was a really interesting question to me. I hadn't thought about, it got me starting to think about what types of figurative language I see in academic writing, because I felt like I certainly did. And then I found a pretty good excerpt that someone else had already written on using figurative language in your essay writing. The title of this piece is Incorporating Figurative Language into Your Paper by Allison Wise, published on January 12th, 2012. As you can see, there is a piece of banjo hair under my piece of tape. Ooh, that's interesting. Figurative language is not just used in literature. You can employ it in your essay writing to great effect. Figurative language adds color to your writing by taking your words and applying them to other, often unexpected objects or concepts. I thought this is a great way to be unique in your writing. So you can use figurative language to create vivid images in your reader's mind that will not only give your writing a more distinctive style and make it more enjoyable to read, but it will also help make your argument more convincing. So what exactly do these terms, metaphor, simile, and personification mean, and how can they be used? So this article specifically talks about metaphor, simile, and personification in essay writing. So a metaphor is a figure of speech that identifies one thing with another. So metaphors do not use like or as, but equate to terms you're comparing. Effective metaphors capture your reader's attention, and by creating strong, clear, interesting images, help the reader better understand and remember your point. So here's an example. The financial crisis in America was a tsunami whose waves of destruction battered the economies of countries all over the world. So similar to that is the simile, which is a comparison as well, but it uses like or as. My essay's introduction is like the first sip of fine wine. That is a simile. And then a metaphor would be my essay's introduction is the first sip of fine wine. Use these sparingly. Similes can help your statement stand out and evoke thought-provoking images for your reader. Fast food industry's attempts to offer healthy menu options are like the 11th hour plea bargain of a death row inmate. Or writing a book is a horrible, exhausting struggle like a long bout of some painful illness. Then we've got personification. So that's giving animals, inanimate objects, and ideas, or giving ideas human thought or human form, personality, or emotion. Though you do not want to employ personification too much in an essay, too many can make your writing tedious or pretentious. One or two uses of personification can make your writing more interesting and rhetorically effective. With funding tight in many schools across the country, art programs are being pickpocketed by science and math programs. The past will always come knocking on the politician's door. So key things to remember: make your images clear, precise, and understandable. You want to interest and maybe intrigue your reader, not confuse them. Stay away from cliche comparisons. What's the point of using figurative language if you're just going to recycle the same tired metaphors? Avoid using too much figurative language. A little goes a long way. I thought that was a great explanation of it. I didn't really even need to put it in my own words because that's pretty much what I would have said. So go check this article out if you want more information on that. To sit down and talk about our next topic because it's kind of a long and in-depth and boring one, but it's important. It is the use of commas. Dun, dun, dun. The biggest thing that I notice with people when they're using commas is that you use too many. You don't need commas all over the place. I always recommend less is more. And then you've got the whole Oxford comma debate, but we'll save that for another time. Banjo, come here. We're gonna go sit down here and talk about commas for a while. There are a lot of people here. And Banjo gets very excited when he sees other people. especially other dogs. He loves seeing other dogs. Okay, Banjo, we're gonna sit here. You can come up here if you want, but you don't have to. And get my handy dandy book. Okay, so I am gonna have to sit for this one because this one is kind of in-depth, kind of long, but we'll get through it. So I was asked about the proper use of the comma. So this is the information that I'm referencing. You can pause here and look at it. Here are the comma rules that I will be focusing on. I'm just going to read all of this information while you get to look at this beautiful scenic scene of this pond. Banjo, I'm going to need you to pick a side. That side? All right. So, the use of the comma. Make sure your comma use falls into one of these 4 simple rules. The comma separates 2 main clauses joined by a coordinating conjunction. It separates a non-essential element from the main clause. It separates an introduction element from the main clause and an item in the series. So a simple sentence would be Joe changed his classes or his work hours. A compound sentence would be Joe changed his classes, comma, or he adjusted his work schedule. So you see we have Joe changed his classes. That's an independent clause. 2 nouns, noun phrases joined by or his work hours. But then we have a comma here. Independent clause connecting it to another independent clause, or he adjusted his work schedule. So there's that. Now I'm just going to go into this long spiel. It's 13 rules about commas. Rule 1. Use commas to separate 3 or more words, phrases, or clauses written in a series. For example, the candidate promised to lower taxes, comma, protect the environment, comma, and reduce crime. Rule 2. Use commas to separate independent clauses when they are joined by any of these 7 coordinating conjunctions: and, but, for, or, nor, so, yet. For example, I have painted the entire house, comma, but he is still working on sanding the doors. Rule number 3. Use commas after introductory clauses, phrases, or words that come before the main clause. While I was eating, comma, the cat scratched at the door. That was an example. Rule number 4. Use a pair of commas in the middle of a sentence to set off clauses, phrases, and words that are not essential to the meaning of the sentence. If these words are dropped, the sentence will still make sense and retain its basic meaning. For example, I am, comma, as you have probably noticed, comma, very nervous about this. Rule number 5. Use commas to separate 2 or more adjectives that describe the same noun when the word and can be inserted between them. For example, he is a strong, comma, healthy man. In parentheses, he is a strong and healthy man. Rule number 6. Use commas to set off all geographical names, items and dates, addresses and titles and names. I live in San Francisco, comma, California, comma, for 20 years. If you use the 2-letter capital form of a state, you do not need a comma after the state. I lived in San Francisco, comma, CA, in capital letters, for 20 years. Kathleen met her husband on December 5th, comma, 2003, comma, in Mill Valley, comma, California. If any part of the date is omitted, leave out the comma. They met in December 2003 in Mill Valley. That sentence didn't have any commas. Al Baker, comma, MD, is our family doctor. Oh, Al Baker, comma, MD, comma, is our family doctor. Rule number 7. Use commas to separate a direct quotation from the rest of the sentence. For example, mother asked, comma, who wants to get ice cream? Question mark, quotes, and then more quotes. I do, comma, he said. Rule number 8. Use commas whenever necessary to prevent possible confusion or misreading. This one is important. A lot of times it can completely change the meaning of a sentence. For example, to Steve, comma, Lincoln was the greatest president. Rule 9. Use commas before or surrounding the name or title of a person directly addressed. For example, will you, comma, Sam, comma, have the surgery, question mark? Yes, comma, doctor, comma, I will. Capitalize a title when directly addressing someone. So here the doctor is capitalized. That's so cute. Look at the geese. Look at them. Do you see them? They're right there. Banjo wants to keep walking. Banjo, we're almost done. Which rule was I on? Rule 10. Use a comma to separate a statement from a question. For example, I can go, comma, can't I? Question mark. Rule number 11. Use a comma to separate contrasting parts of a sentence. That is my money, comma, not yours. Rule 12. Use a comma when beginning sentences with introductory words such as well, now, or yes. Yes, comma, I do need that report. That would be the example. And then rule number 13. Use commas surrounding words such as therefore and however when they are used as interrupters. So this is an example. I would, comma, therefore, comma, like a response, period. I will be happy, comma, however, comma, to volunteer my time. I'm just going to show you again what I just read. So this is information. It just takes practice. If you're second guessing yourself, just look it up. Someone asked how to diversify your vocabulary. I found a list online about ways to broaden your vocabulary, learn new words, and I'll be going into those now. So, number 1, use new words. You can read new words, but unless you have some meaningful interactions with the word, it's less likely that you'll remember it. So while you might thesaurus something good into your paper, if you don't actually write it out or if you don't use it again, you'll probably forget it. So that's number 1. Number 2, read daily. The more you read, the more words you know. I am constantly learning new words from what I'm reading. So keep that in mind. If you want to learn some more words, a great way to do that is to read a lot. And then it's also helpful to learn roots, so prefixes and suffixes. That will help you figure out words better, and you'll be able to pick up more words if you're able to decipher some sort of meaning from them whenever you read that, because we've all encountered some unfamiliar words in our whatever we're reading. Use the thesaurus. It'll help you a lot when you're trying to find new words, but don't make it obvious that you use the thesaurus. If the word isn't going to be with the style of the rest of your writing, you can use some when you're learning new words, but it can be quite noticeable if you're just like, I needed a better word for this, and then it ends up being like an 8-syllable really complex word. That's an exaggeration. Alright. So you use practical vocabulary, no jargon. Don't just try to impress people with your ability to go to thesaurus.com. You can have a word of the day. That'll be a great way to learn new words. There are a lot of apps to do that. You can have a word calendar, a bunch of different ways to do that. You can look up unfamiliar words whenever you're reading. That's one thing I really like about Kindle or ebooks, or that a lot of times you can just click directly on the word and it'll already have a definition for you. It's a lot easier to learn things for me when it's in context, when it's being used. That helps me understand it better. And you can also journal. So the more that you write, the more words you're going to find that you need. So you'll be trying to find a word that is specific and that addresses exactly what you're trying to talk about. And since it's in a journal and you're not fearful of it being seen, a lot of times that'll just make it a little bit easier to try out new words in a private setting like a journal. Remove filler or empty words. That's one thing that will make you have better vocabulary, because instead of saying really interesting, you can say, I don't know, what's a synonym of really interesting? spectacular, intriguing, I don't know. So if you're taking out your filler words, it will already strengthen your writing, and then it will challenge you to find better words that describe what maybe a couple more simple words would already do for you. All right, let's see what else we have. Diversify what you read. Okay, that's a good one. The more stuff you read, the more stuff you'll learn. For one, I randomly learned a bunch of stuff about trees, and it's helped me a lot in my writing because of the words that I learned just from studying forestry or dendrology. And those are things that I wouldn't necessarily, or I wouldn't have read to begin with, but it gave me some vocabulary terms that I can use elsewhere. And so just reading a bunch of different things will give you a bunch of different types of words. Then let's see. Yeah, play word games or word puzzles. The only thing on my phone that I have as far as games are word games. Like the Wordscapes, you got your Scrabble. The more words you know, the more successful you'll be on those. Then, let's see. Yeah, practice the word. So it takes about 10 or 20 times to interact with a word to put it into memory. Or 6 to 12 meaningful interactions. Now that means you're actually using it in your writing or your speech rather than just seeing it on a page. And make up association for words. A thing that goes off of that is making mnemonics or memory tricks. You can visualize your words. Search for synonyms. Yeah, search for synonyms of commonly used words. Take more classes. The more you learn, the more words you'll know. Edit your writing to give it better vocabulary. Look for feedback from your teachers or your peers. And then last of all, use your dictionary to learn new words. So that's a brief list of how to diversify your vocabulary. Banjo, come on.